Hey everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. Today we're going to be giving you a review of Wolverine Origin. Hey everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. Today we're going to be talking about Wolverine Origin, and I am, as always, your host, Brent Casina. So, why are we reading Wolverine Origin? Well, because Wolverine Origin 2 was on my quarantine reads list, and I said I need to reread the first one in order to get a better grasp on what the heck is going on in the second one. Because I remember reading the second one years ago before I bought the collected edition, I think, that I'm going to read now, and I didn't know what the heck was going on. So I figured I'd reread this and, content for the channel, right? So, what is Wolverine Origin? If you're not familiar, this is the official origin of Wolverine. This is the first time Wolverine pops his claws and discovers he's a mutant. So, up until when this was published in 2001, I believe, Wolverine's origin was a complete mystery. We knew that he was a, kind of a superhero assassin for Department H up in Canada. He was part of the Weapon X project. That part was known, how he got his adamantium. We discovered he had, so up until, I think, 1996, when Fatal Attractions happened, or maybe it was 94, at some point, we knew Wolverine got his claws from the Weapon X project, and that he just had a healing factor before then, and that was his mutant power. And then Fatal Attractions comes out in the 90s. I want to say it's 93, 94. I've never read it, so don't quote me on this. But anyway, I do know what happens in it because there's a big cover with it. Magneto pulls the adamantium out of Wolverine's skeleton, and it's discovered that he has bone claws. So that's what you see right here is bone claws. And there was a time where Wolverine did not have adamantium, the metal, in his body, and he was popping bone claws out and snicking people with that, right? Which is a little weird. So if you break a bone claw off and somebody, does the bone claw grow back? I think so. I think we saw that in the Wolverine's Origins movie. So it was a complete mystery for a long time, and it was like one of the better things about the character is that you didn't know who he was. They had all these different stories. You could drop Wolverine anywhere, and it just kind of expanded the mythology around him. Because all of a sudden, they said, there's Wolverine fighting with Captain America in World War II. And you're like, what? He's that old? So this healing factor thing probably keeps him young as well. So how old is Wolverine? Where did he come from? Who is he? All this stuff remained a mystery because the Weapon X project wiped his memories out, and he didn't really remember anything before then. So once we had all these pieces, these weird stories where they placed Wolverine in history, and the fact that he has bone claws, we had all this stuff that kind of was leading to a need for an origin. And you had the X-Men movie come out in 2000, and Marvel, and it's all in here in this trade paperback, this is a couple years old, said we need to define Wolverine's origin before the movies do, because they were going to make a sequel. They were making X2, X-Men United, and Hugh Jackman was taken off as an actor, and his popularity as Wolverine was never higher. So they decided to do an origin for Wolverine. And what came out of it was not really ever the best received story. In fact, I remember when this came out, the feeling was that this was kind of a lame origin. And I think that's because there's not enough Wolverine in this book. Basically, they took the Wolverine and set him way back in the 1800s in Canada somewhere. They don't even really tell you where. I think it's in Alberta province. But so they make him Canadian naturally, which is good. That's what his character was before then. But they're also doing things. They're also doing things here that are not really related to Wolverine. So basically, this gives you his name, where he came from, and the thing that made him pop his claws for the first time. The problem is, he's not very Wolverine-y. In fact, he's like an entirely different character, and they're using this trauma that forces him to pop his claws for the first time to kind of give an excuse as to why his mind was able to be wiped, his memories erased, etc., etc., because there's such trauma that happens here at the end of the second issue. and that is what made his mind susceptible, I guess, to further mind wipings and things like that. Things that you think they do, they don't really do. Like, there's a character in here named Dog that comes for him later on, and he's, some people thought he was Sabretooth, but he's never really made out to be Sabretooth. In fact, they give him, like, these 3 big scars across his face, and since Sabretooth doesn't have it, I guess he's not Sabretooth. So that's fine. There's some other weird stuff in here as to, like, who Wolverine's parents are. So his name is James Howlett. We know that from this book. We don't know who his dad is. It's really weird. I remember reading this, like, or breezing through it in comic shops, or maybe reading at the library after that, many, many years ago, and going, what the hell is going on? Because in the first issue, you meet a man named Logan. And this man named Logan looks just like Wolverine. He's got the hair, he's got the mutton chops, he's got a bad attitude, and you're like, what is that Wolverine? He's like a servant on this big estate in Canada. I'm trying to flip through to find a page here. Here's the drawing of him right there. Kind of looks like Wolverine. There you go. Right in the center there. That's this guy named Logan, and he is Dog's father, this other kid that lives on this big estate. Turns out James Howlett, a.k.a. Wolverine, a.k.a. Logan, is the son of a rich man in Canada, basically. So in the first issue, you don't know who Wolverine is. You don't know who Logan is. It's just, here's a bunch of characters, and there you go. And it was like, this is the first issue of Wolverine's origin. Like, we met a guy named Logan. We think he's going to be Wolverine. That's not actually the case. And you don't really find that out until the end of the second issue. And even at the end of the second issue, much less the third, you're not really sure who his parents are. There's some questionable parentage because his mom's been in hiding for years and years and years. She's like this gothic romance figure that's like, his mother lives in the top of the tower in the corner of this great estate, and nobody ever sees her or comes and talks to her unless, like the one main servant lady that gives her food and helps her change and bathe. Like, she's gone crazy or something. There's allusions to his brother. Wolverine had an older brother that died early on, and then later on when he does pop his claws, they go, oh no, you're just like your brother, or that not again, things like that are muttered, which means like this has happened before. So, and then once the trauma happens, his mother actually is like not cradling her husband, but cradling Logan, the manservant guy that looks just like the character we know and love, but that's actually like a giant jerk. So is the mother romantically involved with this Mr. Logan and not John Howlett, who we think is James Howlett's father? Is he so confusing. James Howlett, a.k.a. Wolverine, is he a bastard from his mother and such, and like that's why his grandfather hates him so much and is like, cursing him out and stuff? Maybe. It's never really explained, never really explored. And the weird thing is, like, all this stuff is written down by a little Irish girl who's meant to be a companion for young James. And at the very end, she writes down her story, and this story is lost to the ages because it's thrown in a fire. So nobody ever finds out the history. This is just by some magic we found out, basically. So it's kind of a strange story. And since there's only really 2 times that Wolverine pops his claws, in issue 2 and like the final issue, it's not really satisfying as far as a Wolverine story goes, because there's not much Wolverining to do. And even the character that we meet isn't very much like Wolverine. So it kind of left a bad taste in readers' mouths to be like, this is the origin of my favorite character? This is lame. He could have been a badass. He could have been something else. So I think it was because all these other things were so interesting that other writers had dropped in stories before that this thing was so boring because they couldn't come up with anything better or the mystery was gone. It's just really, really strange and weird. I think the trauma works in issue number 2. I think that part is cool. And then they they run away from their problems and journey to another place in Canada and grow up and work on this quarry. I think that kind of works, but all in all, it's so far set away from the mutant problem and the mutant world that we know and love from the X-Men, that it almost falls apart. Like, even when Wolverine journeys to Canada in modern comic book stories, he's meeting other mutants, or he's falling in love with other mutants, or Sabretooth is always hunting him. So there's always like this link back to the X-Men world. There's nothing in that here in this book, you know, to pull you in. So I don't really like this book. I don't really think it's a good read for anyone. It's just kind of like, you know, if you really like Wolverine and want to see where he comes from, you can read it, but you're not going to be satisfied by it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of, you know, bummer. So is it written by anybody, right? Who's doing the art? Who's doing the writing, Brent? Well, you have Paul Jenkins, a one-time Marvel writer. I don't think he's done anything major for Marvel and DC in quite a long time, but for a while he was pretty hot. He did this. He was doing Peter Parker Spider-Man and Spectacular Spider-Man for a while in the 2000s, and he did the Inhumans with Jay Lee at the Marvel Knights imprint in the early 90s or mid 90s, something like that. So he's a good writer. He's a good writer. I will say that the story is well written in terms of, like, you will keep reading, you will not get bored, you will kind of get drawn in, but not because it's a Wolverine story. That I can tell you. The art, I think, is the best thing about this book. They got Andy Kubert to do the art, and they got Richard Isanove to do the digital paintings. So what does that mean? Well, Andy Kubert is doing the pencils. So, like, you can look up close here, and you can kind of tell that it's not inked. Like, anywhere in the main character bodies, it's a little, you know, you're using the color to differentiate the things instead of, like, typical comic book inks. And that's because they did the pencils and then they did the colors over top of them. And this might have been one of the very first times it was done in mainstream comic books. Okay, so here's a good panel. Let's look at this with the shading on the eyes. Now, normally you'd have a bunch of dark lines with the cross-hatching that would be inked there, but this time you can barely see them. Let's see if I can get this to focus. Well, maybe not. But just look online. You can find examples of it. And they've done this with Andy Kubert many times after this. I think also they did 1602 as well in the same style with Neil Gaiman telling this alternate history of the Marvel Universe set in the New World, like in Jamestown times, pre-colonial times. So they kind of pioneered that here on Origin. It does work. It does kind of feel like it's a little bit old, like we hadn't discovered really all the modern art techniques from comic books. So this is very, very painterly, makes it feel very old, and gives it some weight and some gravitas. You have covers done by Joe Quesada, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time. Now he's the chief creative officer and doesn't do much drawing. Like, you know, Jim Lee at least tries to put maybe 20 pages out a year of something and, you know, puts himself in some project to keep his name out there as one of the top artists. But Joe Quesada is a very good artist, but he hasn't drawn much in 20 years. I think Daredevil Father was like the last sequential stuff he's done, and he does covers off and on, but even now I feel like his cover stuff is he hasn't done a whole lot, because he did the covers to this, he did the covers for Wolverine Origins, that comic book series, which, total side note, you'd think it would be like the sequel to this and go more into what happens after this book. It does not. It does not. The Wolverine Origins series by Daniel Way basically takes this weird idea that Jeff Loeb came up with, that Wolverine's not really a mutant, he's a lupine. He's some sort of weird animalistic creature, and goes up against this guy named Romulus for 60 issues, and deals with his past a little bit in the first couple of arcs, but by the middle issues, by like issue number 30, it's all about his new son, Daken, and fighting Romulus, and like doing that stuff instead of like exploring his past, whereas everybody thought going in it was going to be an exploration of what happened after Wolverine Origin. So don't go into Wolverine Origins, plural, thinking you're going to get more of this. You're not. But I think that's the best thing about this book is the art, right? Richard Isanove is a great colorist. He's been great for a long time. I think after this, his next big work was the Stephen King Dark Tower series with Jay Lee, which are beautiful to look at, and they're all colored in the same style. You know, Richard Isanove's got a very distinct style. He loves these like amber hues that are on the covers here, and he uses them to great effect. 1602, also same team, Richard Eisenhower, Andy Kubert. So if you love the art in here, go check that out. Go check out Neil Gaiman's 1602. I think you can pretty much still find that readily available. So yeah, I think it's a mediocre Wolverine story. It's definitely a poor X-Men story. And as an origin for Wolverine, I think it kind of fails, and it's a bummer. I would have liked to have seen more mutant stuff, you know, to really ground it in like an origin tale, like Batman Year One, for example. He's freaking Batman by like issue 2, issue 3, or something like that, and it becomes a Batman story. Whereas he's not Wolverine in this at all. He's not Logan popping claws, and then, you know, he doesn't join Weapon X at the end of it, which I think would have been a little bit of a better origin, just to meet Wolverine, know he has claws, know he's on adventures, and then have the book end with him joining Weapon X and getting his memory erased, and then be like, okay, from here, go to Weapon X, that storyline, and read that, and then you'll be caught up. But no, they wanted to go so far back that it's barely recognizable as a mutant story or as a Wolverine story, other than this character of James having these claws popped. So I think it's a big letdown, a big bummer. The neat thing about this collection is all the extras in the back, if you can make sense of them. Because like they have the original pitch, the original idea here, and then how it changed again, and changed again, and changed again. And you kind of get the feeling, reading all this back matter, that this thing really was kind of written by committee, came up with by committee. It wasn't necessarily like Paul Jenkins had a great idea to do the origin of Wolverine. You know, he's involved in the story, but it's a lot of editors as well. And the publisher and the editor-in-chief, Joe Quesada, all having their fingers in the pie. Now, I'm not a comic book writer, so I don't know if this is the regular way it goes, but at least the way the back matter makes it out to seem is that the story idea, the main outline and all stuff came up with by a group of editors working at Marvel at the time, and then maybe Paul Jenkins had a pitch on it, using that outline, and then was like assigned the story by himself. So it's not really like, doesn't feel natural, and I think that's the best way to describe this story, is that this is not a natural origin for Wolverine. Whereas like Batman Year One is all Frank Miller. You can tell it's a natural Year One story from Frank Miller, and it's a natural story from Batman, and you feel that when you read it, and that's why Year One still holds up as a great story. Nobody really talks about Wolverine origin as a great story, and I think that's because you can feel it's kind of like, you know, cooked by committee instead of by an artiste, you know, a chef, so to speak. But it sure is pretty to look at. Sure is pretty to look at. So that's my review for Wolverine Origin. If you're really interested, I think you can read it. But if you're not that interested, it's definitely something you can pass on. That's for sure. So thank you guys for watching. As always, comment, like, share down below. It helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more X-Men content, stay tuned. I'm going to read Wolverine Origin, I think, next, and do a review on that. Part 2, Wolverine Origin 2, which is an entirely different writer and entirely different artist. So what could go wrong, right? Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and as always, we will see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.